Let me take you to the north, far north, where the winds carry the scent of pine and salt, and the mountains rise like old gods above the fjords. There, beneath a wide gray sky, in the year 1015, a boy was born. His name was Harald Sigurdsson, but he would be known across the world by many other names. Harald the Hard Ruler, Haralds, and in time, the last Viking king. He was born into a family of fierce blood. His mother, Asta Gudbrandsdatter, was proud and strong-willed. She had already raised a son who would become a king, Olaf Haraldsson, later known as Saint Olaf. His father, Sigurd Syr, was quieter, a wise man, a landowner, and a chieftain of noble descent. Harald was different from the beginning. Tall, strong, blue-eyed, silent when he needed to be, wild when he wished to be. His mother often said, he was born with iron in his bones and fire in his belly. In the long winters, while snow buried the rooftops and the nights stretched on forever, Harald would sit by the hearth and listen to the old men tell stories. Of Odin and the ravens, of Thor and his hammer, of the days when the sea was young, and Vikings carved paths across it like wolves across snow. He listened, and he remembered, and when he wasn't listening, he was climbing, running, throwing, fighting. His world was one of stone and wood, of oars and axes. He learned to read the sky, to follow the river, to track the deer through frost. He could not yet grow a beard, but he already dreamed of wearing a king's crown. But fate would not wait for him to grow older. It came early, as it often does, and changed everything. Harald's half-brother, King Olaf II, ruled Norway. A Christian king, stern and devout, he tried to unite the land under one faith and one crown. But the land was old and stubborn. The Jarls, the noble lords, had long memories. They remembered freedom, and they remembered the gods of their fathers. By the time Harald was 15, rebellion had taken root. The great Danish king, not the Great, laid claim to Norway. Olaf's allies vanished. His enemies grew bold. In the year 1028, Olaf was driven from his throne and fled across the sea. And Harald, still a boy, watched his hero vanish into mist. 2 years passed. Then, in 1030, Olaf returned with warriors at his side. He meant to reclaim his kingdom by the sword. He rode north through the valleys and called his followers to him. And Harald followed. He was only 15, but tall as a man. He would not be left behind. He rode beside Olaf into battle at Stiklestad, one of the most famous battles in Norwegian history. The sun did not shine that day. The sky was gray and heavy. The air was full of prayer and axe song. Harald fought in the shield wall, shoulder to shoulder with grown men. A boy holding a sword he could barely lift. The battle was chaos. Olaf fought like a bear, but he was struck down by spear, by axe, by betrayal. Harald saw it happen. He saw his brother fall, blood on his lips. But Harald did not break. He kept fighting, and when the battle was lost, he fled. Wounded, alone, he crossed mountains. He waded rivers. He bled into the snow. But he did not stop. At 15, he became a fugitive, an exile, but also a survivor. Harald fled east. He traveled with a small band of men who had also escaped the battle. They moved through forests dark with wolves and shadowed by pine. They ate roots and snow. They slept beneath the trees. At last, they came to Sweden, but it was not safe there. The Danes had allies. So they pushed farther, across the Baltic, along rivers that coiled like silver threads through the land. They arrived in Kiev, a grand city ruled by Yaroslav the Wise, prince of the Kievan Rus. Yaroslav was no stranger to warriors. And when this tall, young Norseman arrived, wounded but unbroken, he welcomed him. Harald offered his sword, and it was gladly taken. Kiev was a city of light and gold. It was a world away from the stone farms of Norway. Here, churches had domes that glowed like fire. Markets rang with voices in Greek, Slavic, and Norse. Harald learned new customs, new languages, new ways of war. He fought for Yaroslav against raiders from the steppe, the Pecheneg, horsemen who struck like lightning and vanished into the grasslands. Harald learned to ride fast, shoot straight, strike first. He grew in skill and fame. But always, his thoughts turned south, to Byzantium, to Constantinople. By the time he was in his early 20s, Harald had made up his mind. He gathered his men and rode south, through forests, along rivers, through lands where he was a stranger. And finally, he stood before the gates of the greatest city in the world, Constantinople. The Romans called it Byzantium. The Norse called it Miklagard, the great city. It was a city of marble and smoke, gold and blood, a city of emperors and plots. Harald offered his sword again, and once more it was accepted. He joined the Varangian Guard, an elite unit of foreign warriors sworn to protect the Byzantine emperor. They were mostly Norsemen, tall, fierce, loyal. Their loyalty was not to politics or language, but to gold and to each other. They fought with two-handed axes, broad and brutal, and they did not flinch. Harald fought pirates in the Aegean Sea. He put down revolts in Sicily. He marched to the Holy Land. He guarded emperors, stormed castles, crossed deserts. He became rich, famous. He was known in Constantinople as Aralts. He learned Greek, Latin, Arabic. He studied. He wrote poetry. He dressed in silks, but never forgot the feel of fur. He walked marble halls, but dreamed of pine forests. He was no longer just a warrior. He was becoming a king. But fame has weight, and gold draws eyes. In time, Harald became entangled in the twisted courts of Byzantium. Some say he loved a princess. Others say he crossed the Empress Zoe. Perhaps he asked for too much. Perhaps he threatened too many. Whatever the cause, he was imprisoned, locked away in a tower, high above the city he had served. But Harald had not survived Stiklestad and the step to die in a stone room. He escaped. Some say he bribed guards. Some say he used ropes. Others say he walked out in disguise. But however he did it, he fled. He boarded a ship in secret, sailed north, and returned to Kiev. There, waiting for him, was Elisive, the daughter of Prince Yaroslav. He asked for her hand. He was a foreigner, a warrior, a man of uncertain future. But he was also royal, rich, dangerous. Yaroslav agreed. Harald married Elisive. But he was not done. When Harald returned to Norway in 1045, he was no longer the wounded boy who had fled the field at Stiklestad. He returned with gold, with warriors, with stories from lands most Norwegians had never even imagined. He returned taller, stronger, colder, and patient. The throne of Norway was not empty. It was held by Magnus the Good, the son of his half-brother Olaf. The boy king had ruled fairly, and the people loved him. But Harald carried more than a claim. He carried a name that echoed across oceans. He had become a legend, while still alive. There was tension. Harald could have made war, could have drawn his sword and marched straight to the capital. But he didn't. Instead, he offered Magnus peace. Gold. Troops. Half his kingdom, for now. Magnus agreed. For a brief time, Norway had two kings. It did not last long. Magnus died just a year later, in 1047. No battle, no scandal. Some whispered of poison. Others believed he died naturally. But Harald said little. And from that moment on, he ruled alone. At last, Harald was king. Not just in name, but in truth. Norway bent to his rule. The jarls, the lords, the farmers, they all watched this tall, sharp-eyed man from Constantinople climb the high seat once held by Olaf. But Harald was not his brother. He was no saint. He ruled with a heavy hand. He punished rebellion quickly and cruelly. He crushed disloyal jarls. He raised taxes to fund his armies and ships. He broke old traditions and replaced them with his own. And yet, the land did not rebel. Why? Because Harald was more than a king. He was a warrior king. He led from the front. He shared the hardships of his men. When he marched, he slept on the ground. When he sailed, he rowed. When he fought, his axe bit first. He also brought peace where there had been none. He strengthened the coin. He built churches. He supported poets and skalds. He wrote verses himself, some of which still survive. One reads, "The wolf howls in the night, but I bring the dawn with steel." That was Harald. Hard, but fair. For nearly 2 decades, Harald ruled Norway. But kings do not sit still, especially not Viking kings. To the west lay England, rich and full of history. The Danes had ruled it. Norse blood still flowed through many of its rulers. Harald believed it was his by right. He claimed that King Edward the Confessor, who ruled England, had promised him the crown. Whether that was true is a matter of debate, but Harald believed it. Or perhaps he simply wanted to believe it. So he waited. He watched. And in 1066, Edward died. England was thrown into chaos. 3 men claimed the crown. Harold Godwin's son, a powerful English noble, William, Duke of Normandy, from across the Channel, and Harald Hardrada, the last Viking. Harold saw his chance. In the summer of 1066, Harold gathered his fleet. He called his warriors from the fjords, from the forests, from the cities. Old men who had followed him since Kiev. Young men eager for glory. Farmers with axes. Sailors with dreams. He sailed west, with over 300 ships. By his side was Tostig Godwin's son, the exiled brother of England's new king. Tostig had quarreled with Harold and now sought revenge. They landed in the north of England, in Yorkshire, and began to carve their way inland. And for a moment, it worked. They won battles. They burned towns. The people feared them. But Harold Godwin's son was no fool. He marched his army 200 miles in under 2 weeks, arriving in the north before Harold expected. And so came the morning of September 25th, 1066. A quiet meadow by a river. A bridge. A field of frost. Stamford Bridge. Harold had left his armor behind. It was a warm day. He had expected a peaceful meeting, perhaps surrender. When the English army appeared, it was too late. Still, he mounted his horse, drew his sword, and smiled. One English chronicler said Harold stood like a giant, tall as an elm, fierce as a flame. He fought like a man who knew it would be his last battle. When his horse was cut down, he rose and fought on foot. When his shield broke, he used both hands to swing his sword. He killed dozens. Some say he sang a verse before the end. We do not go to hell with shame, but with sword song in our ears. Then he fell, an arrow to the throat. The last Viking king died standing. Around him, his men fell. Some fled, the rest surrendered. By evening, the river ran red. Of the 300 ships that brought Harold's army, only 24 sailed home. News of Harold's death spread quickly. Across England, the people breathed easier. In Norway, they wept. His body was eventually returned home and buried at Nidaros, now known as Trondheim. He left behind sons, Magnus and Olaf, who would rule after him. But something else died that day at Stamford Bridge. Something older. Harold was not just a man. He was the last breath of the Viking Age. After him, the long ships grew fewer. The raids stopped. The gods fell silent. The world moved on. But stories stayed. Even in death, Harold's shadow stretched long. In Norway, they remembered him as Harald Hardrada, the hard ruler. In Byzantium, he was still Aralds, the great foreign guard. In sagas and poems, he became larger than life. A king, a poet, a warrior, a boy who lost a brother, a man who sailed the world, a king who died with sword in hand. Time does not forget easily. The wind still howls through the fjords where Harold rode. The stones still stand where his ships once launched. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the fire crackles low and the sea is calm, some say you can still hear the oars, dipping in rhythm, steady and proud. A ghost fleet, led by a tall man with ice-blue eyes. Harald Hardrada, the last Viking king,